Temu. It was an empire of bargains, a digital souk where desires were fulfilled for a pittance. From its humble beginnings in China, Temu grew with astonishing speed, entwining itself around the globe. It promised everything, from inflatable pool toys to diamond earrings, all at prices that seemed to defy economics. But behind the shiny facade of bargain basement bliss lurked a darker truth, a tale woven from dubious practices and potential peril. Temu, once the darling of bargain hunters, now serves as a stark reminder that every transaction has its price. Our story takes us from the bustling factories of China to the unsuspecting doorsteps of consumers worldwide. We will delve into the shadowy world of international trade, exposing the loopholes exploited and the regulations flouted in the relentless pursuit of market dominance. This is a story about more than just cheap goods. It's about the choices we make as consumers and the ethical dilemmas of the digital age. To understand Temu's meteoric rise, one must first grasp the potent cocktail of technology and strategy that fueled its ascent. Temu was a marvel of modern engineering built upon sophisticated algorithms and an obsessive devotion to data. Imagine a system so finely tuned. It could anticipate your desires before you even knew them yourself. Temu's algorithms, honed on a vast ocean of consumer data, seemed to possess this uncanny ability. The app's interface, a mesmerizing carousel of enticing deals and personalized recommendations, became a digital siren song. But the algorithms were just the tip of the iceberg. Behind the scenes, a team of brilliant strategists plotted Temu's relentless expansion, their sights set on global domination. Temu's strategy was simple: flood the market with an overwhelming deluge of products at prices so low as to seem almost fictional. From its sprawling network of factories and warehouses in China, a seemingly endless torrent of goods flowed outward. Electronics, clothing, home goods, toys, Temu offered it all, often at prices that were a fraction of what competitors dared to charge. Traditional retailers watched in horror as their pricing models crumbled. Temu, unburdened by legacy costs and fueled by cheap labor, had become an unstoppable force, a red tide of consumerism washing over the globe. Temu's rise was not without its casualties. Smaller competitors, many family-owned businesses, found themselves struggling to stay afloat. Traditional brick-and-mortar retailers faced an even more dire predicament. Some accused Temu of predatory pricing, of deliberately undercutting competitors to gain market share. Whatever the truth, one thing was clear: Temu's ascent had come at a cost. Consumers, intoxicated by the allure of endless bargains, seemed unconcerned by the plight of those caught in the wake of the e-commerce giant's expansion. How did Temu maintain its stranglehold on low prices? The answer lies in the de minimis rule. This rule dictates that goods imported into the US with a value below a certain threshold are exempt from duties and taxes. Temu exploited this rule with ruthless efficiency. By breaking down shipments into small parcels, they could flood the American market while dodging hefty import tariffs. It was a brilliant, if somewhat cynical, strategy, one that allowed them to undercut American businesses with impunity. The consequences of this legal arbitrage were profound. American retailers, already grappling with rising labor costs, found themselves outmaneuvered. The floodgates had been opened, and a tidal wave of cheap goods was washing over the American consumer landscape. The very fabric of American retail was being unraveled thread by thread. The de minimis rule had become a weapon in the hands of a ruthless competitor. Even as Temu's empire expanded, cracks began to appear in its facade. Customers, initially seduced by rock-bottom prices, started to notice a recurring theme. The quality of Temu's goods often left much to be desired. Items arrived damaged, broken, or simply not as described. The allure of the bargain was beginning to wear thin, as consumers started to question whether the endless cycle of consumption was truly worth the cost. Reports surfaced of products containing hazardous materials, posing a very real danger to unsuspecting consumers. Products aimed at children, from toys coated in lead paint to teething rings laced with harmful phthalates, began raising red flags. Clothing was found to contain dangerous levels of formaldehyde and other carcinogens. The very products meant to enhance our lives were revealed to be potential ticking time bombs. The stories were enough to make even the most hardened bargain hunter think twice. A young girl rushed to the emergency room, her skin blistered after wearing a pair of sparkly sandals purchased on Temu. A toddler hospitalized, lead poisoning confirmed after weeks of chewing on a colorful, imported toy. The evidence was damning, pointing to a corporate culture where profits trumped precautions. The scientific community dubbed it the body burden, the accumulation of harmful chemicals in our bodies. Temu, with its flood of cheaply made goods, was rapidly becoming a major contributor to this growing global health crisis. Hormonal disruptions, developmental delays, increased risks of certain cancers — these are just a few of the potential health impacts. The bargain basement had become a minefield, littered with hidden dangers. Even as cracks appeared in Temu's facade, a storm was brewing on the horizon. Trade tensions between the United States and China began to boil over. Tariffs were levied and counter-levied, their impact reverberating through global supply chains. Temu, heavily reliant on its Chinese manufacturing base, found itself caught in the crossfire. The US government began to take a closer look at Temu's operations. The de minimis rule was now being scrutinized for its role in facilitating unfair competition. Lawmakers called for reforms to the de minimis threshold, arguing that it was being exploited. Temu, accustomed to operating with impunity, suddenly found itself facing a more assertive regulatory landscape. Temu's response to this mounting pressure was, initially at least, a masterpiece of corporate doublespeak. They crafted their words with precision, aiming to placate both the public and their stakeholders. They issued carefully worded statements assuring customers and investors that they were committed to complying with all applicable laws and regulations, emphasizing their dedication to ethical practices, while simultaneously lobbying behind the scenes to preserve the very loopholes that had fueled their rise. Their actions were a stark contrast to their public promises. They attempted to portray themselves as a victim of protectionist policies, painting a picture of an underdog fighting against unfair restrictions, a champion of free trade caught in the crosshairs of a geopolitical dispute. This narrative was designed to garner sympathy and support. But the public, increasingly aware of the true cost of Temu's bargain basement empire, was no longer buying it. The facade was crumbling. The tide of public opinion, once so firmly in their favor, was turning. Conversations were shifting and skepticism was growing. Consumers, bombarded with news reports about unsafe products, questionable labor practices, and the hidden costs of their purchases and the environmental impact of fast fashion, began to see the bigger picture. The allure of cheap goods was fading, began to question their allegiance to the cult of cheap. Ethical considerations were starting to outweigh the desire for low prices. For Temu, the party was coming to an end. The once celebrated business model was under intense scrutiny. The free ride was over. The consequences of their actions were catching up. The chickens, as they say, were coming home to roost. The reality of their practices could no longer be ignored, and the once mighty e-commerce giant was about to face a rude awakening. The era of unchecked growth and minimal accountability was drawing to a close. As if navigating the treacherous waters of a trade war and a growing consumer backlash wasn't enough, Temu soon found itself embroiled in a scandal of truly Orwellian proportions, shaking the very foundation of its operations. Whispers of data breaches and privacy violations, initially dismissed as the ramblings of conspiracy theorists, began to solidify into a deeply unsettling reality. Remember those sophisticated algorithms, those digital bloodhounds sniffing out our deepest desires? It turned out they were even more voracious than we imagined, hoovering up not just our shopping habits, but a treasure trove of personal data, from browsing history to location data, even contact lists and social media activity. The implications were chilling, to say the least. This wasn't just about targeted advertising anymore. This was about mass data collection on an unprecedented scale, a digital dragnet cast across the globe, scooping up the private lives of millions, without their knowledge or consent. And the question on everyone's mind was, where was all this data going, and what was it being used for? The lack of transparency was alarming. While Temu maintained its usual facade of corporate innocence, issuing carefully worded denials and promising to protect user privacy, the evidence told a different story, one of deceit and exploitation. Cybersecurity experts uncovered a complex web of servers, many located in mainland China, where vast quantities of user data were being routed, analyzed, and presumably exploited for unknown purposes. The plot thickened, dear viewers. as the shadowy hand of the Chinese Communist Party emerged from the shadows, casting a long and ominous shadow over the global marketplace. Temu, it turned out, wasn't just another private company pursuing profits. It was deeply intertwined with the Chinese state, its operations subject to the whims and dictates of the party, making it a unique entity in the world of commerce. Now, for those unfamiliar with the intricacies of Chinese corporate law, let me assure you, it's not quite the same as what we're accustomed to in the West. The legal landscape is complex and often opaque, with many layers of bureaucracy and control. In China, the line between private enterprise and the state is often blurred, with companies expected to toe the party line and cooperate with government initiatives, even when it comes to matters of data security and, dare I say, espionage. This intertwining of interests creates a unique dynamic that is hard to navigate. The implications were staggering, reaching far beyond what anyone had initially suspected. It wasn't just about business, it was about control and influence on a global scale. Temu, it seemed, wasn't just selling us cheap goods, it was potentially acting as a conduit for the Chinese government to gather vast quantities of data on citizens around the world, a treasure trove of information that could be used for various purposes. A tool, perhaps, in their quest for global influence and dominance, subtly weaving their presence into the fabric of international commerce, the data breaches, the privacy violations, the shadowy connections to the Chinese state. It was all starting to make sense, painting a picture of a grand strategy at play. Temu, the e-commerce darling, the bargain hunter's paradise, was revealed to be something far more complex, far more sinister than anyone had imagined. It was a revelation that changed everything. The walls were closing and the storm clouds had broken, and Temu, once seemingly invincible, found itself facing a perfect storm of its own making. Consumers, once enamored by the allure of endless bargains, were now wary, their trust eroded by a steady drip of scandals and revelations. The trade war escalated, tariffs bit, and the de minimis loophole, that magical portal through which Temu had funneled its flood of cheap goods, began to close. Lawsuits piled up, alleging everything from product liability to data breaches, each new filing chipping away at the company's carefully constructed facade. And then, as quickly as it had risen, Temu began to fall. Sales plummeted, investors fled, and the once ubiquitous ads, those digital billboards plastered across every corner of the internet, vanished almost overnight. The empire of bargains, built on a foundation of exploitation, deception, and a healthy dose of geopolitical naivete, was crumbling before our very eyes. The house of cards, so precariously balanced, had finally collapsed. The rise and fall of Temu is a cautionary tale for our times, a parable of the digital age. It's a story about the seductive power of cheap, the allure of convenience, and the often hidden costs of our insatiable consumer appetites. It's a story about the unintended consequences of globalization, the dark side of free trade, and the challenges of regulating a digital world that often seems to operate by its own rules. It's a story about the importance of transparency, the value of ethical business practices, and the need for greater awareness among consumers about the true cost of the goods we consume. But perhaps most importantly, it's a story about the dangers of unchecked ambition, the corrosive effects of greed, and the importance of remembering that even in the fast-paced, ever-evolving world of e-commerce, there are still consequences for bad behavior. Temu, the once mighty titan, now lies in ruins, a cautionary tale whispered on the digital winds. Let us hope we heed its lessons.